I woke up that morning already feeling something off in the air, like the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for a blow none of us were prepared for. And I moved through the kitchen, touching the counter, the chair, the edges of a familiar world, trying to settle the unease, rising slowly in my chest because I had felt it, building for months, a quiet shift in my son's tone, the way his eyes drifted away when I spoke, the way he kept glancing at his phone as if waiting for permission to breathe. And every time he mentioned her, that same heaviness grew, pressing under my ribs until it felt like something inside me was being scraped thin. And that morning as I poured coffee, I kept hearing the echoes of the last argument, the way he had raised his voice for the first time in his life, not because he hated me, but because he loved her more than he understood. And she knew exactly how to use that love to twist him farther from us. When he arrived that afternoon, there was a strange tightness in his expression, a brightness stretched so thin it looked like it would snap if I touched it wrong. And he didn't sit like he used to, didn't smile, didn't relax. He stayed at the edge of the chair, gripping his phone in both hands, like it was the only thing tethering him to whatever world she had built between them. And he began talking fast, words tumbling out with tension threaded through each one, about how she needed him, how she felt unwelcome, how she was tired of feeling judged, how she believed our family didn't see her value, how she had been crying for nights saying we didn't respect her, saying we were pushing them apart, saying we wanted him to choose between us and her. And as he spoke, I watched something inside him struggle close to the surface, like the boy I raised was trying to push through the fog she had wrapped around him, but couldn't quite reach daylight anymore. And he kept saying she felt hurt, she felt attacked, she felt ignored, she felt like we didn't see her as part of the family. And he repeated every word, as if he had memorized them, rehearsed them, consumed them, until they replaced his own thoughts. And I asked gently what he felt, what he wanted, what he believed, and he paused for a split second, long enough for fear to flicker in his eyes, before he repeated her phrases again, almost word for word, as if he was afraid to betray the script she drilled into him. And that was the moment I realized he wasn't speaking for himself. He was speaking for her through him, her voice cloaked in his breath. And it hit me harder than any argument could have, because I had been watching this slow unraveling for months, pretending I didn't see it, pretending it was just young love, pretending it would pass. But it didn't pass. It deepened into something that held him by the throat and pulled him away from everything he had once been. And I asked him why she was so certain we hated her, why she believed we were pushing her out. And he swallowed hard, looking down at his hands, as if the answer was written there. And he said, she told him, we looked down on her, that we didn't think she was good enough, that we judged her background, her job, her attitude, that we made her feel small every time she entered the house. And none of that was true. None of that had ever happened. None of us had shown her anything but patience and kindness and room to adjust. But she had twisted silence into insult, politeness into judgment, boundaries into rejection, and used those distortions to convince him that loyalty to her required distance from us. And as he kept talking, I watched the way his shoulders tightened, the way his voice trembled, the way his eyes shone with a confusion he didn't know how to name. And when he finally looked at me, really looked at me for the first time in months, his face crumpled. For just a heartbeat, like he was begging me to tell him he wasn't going insane, begging me to cut him loose from the fear she had knotted inside him. But the second his phone buzzed, everything inside him shut down again. His posture snapped, back to rigid, his voice flattened, his eyes dimmed as if she had reached through the screen and tightened her grip around whatever remained of him. And he stood up, abruptly, saying he couldn't stay long, saying she needed him, saying she wasn't feeling well, saying she was upset after their last talk. And he said it with that strange mixture of guilt and fear, like someone who had been taught that leaving her side even briefly meant punishment later. And as he stepped toward the door, I reached out to him, calling his name softly. But he flinched, barely noticeable, but enough to slice through my chest, because he wasn't recoiling from me. He was recoiling from the internal conflict she had planted deep inside him. And he whispered that he wished things weren't so hard, that he wished we could all just get along, that he wished I understood her the way he did. And I wanted to tell him that I saw everything more clearly than he could imagine, that I knew exactly what was happening, that I recognized the signs of isolation, manipulation, and emotional dependence. But I also knew saying it now would only push to him deeper into her shadow, and widened the divide she was already exploiting, and when the door closed behind him, the house sank into a silence that felt like grief, like mourning for someone who was still alive but already slipping away. And I stood there trying to breathe past, the ache tightening around my ribs because I knew this was only the beginning of something darker, something heavier, something that would cost him pieces of himself he didn't even realize were being taken. And as the evening light dimmed across the floor, I felt the truth settle into me for the first time. Fully, he wasn't choosing her over us. He was being pulled, dragged, carved into someone who couldn't tell love from control. And I knew just from the way he walked away that the storm ahead would break something in all of us. The morning after he left the house, feeling like a stranger, wearing my son's face, I woke with the kind of heaviness that doesn't fade after sleep, the kind that settles into the bones and waits. And as I moved through the kitchen, the silence felt wrong too, still too tense, like the walls remembered. The way his voice cracked, the way he looked torn, the way she had already begun, shaping him into someone who feared disappointing her more than hurting himself. And I tried to distract my mind with small tasks, boiling water, rinsing dishes, wiping the counter, but everything felt hollow because I kept replaying the moment he flinched, when I reached out to him the moment his phone buzzed, and she pulled every drop of clarity out of him with a single vibration. And by midday the house felt like it was shrinking, closing in around me with all the words I didn't say, all the fears I couldn't voice. And the phone finally buzzed, slicing through the stillness, with the force of something I'd been bracing for, and when I saw his name, my chest tightened because I already knew this call wouldn't be him. Reaching out for comfort, it would be him, carrying her fear, her anger, her insecurity straight to me. And the moment I answered, his breath poured through the line, fast, uneven, full of agitation, and he started talking too quickly, words tumbling over each other like he was trying to say them all before he lost his nerve. And he said she was devastated, said she cried all night, said she felt unwelcome, said she felt attacked, said she was questioning whether he even valued her, said she didn't understand why our family treated her like an outsider. And I listened, quietly, because the more he spoke, the clearer it became that none of this was his voice. This was her narrative, her emotion, her rewriting of moments that never happened. And he kept repeating that she didn't feel safe around us, that she felt judged, that she felt like we wanted to tear them apart. And each repetition tightened something painful inside me because it wasn't her sensitivity driving this. It was her need to isolate him, paired with his need to feel like he was protecting someone he loved. And when I asked him softly what exactly she thought we had done, he hesitated long enough for uncertainty to flicker through the line. Before he said she couldn't point to anything specific. But I could feel it. And that word feel echoed in my mind like a warning, because people who weaponize emotion live inside that word, bending it, twisting it, reshaping it until perception replaces truth. And as he kept talking, his voice rose slightly, carrying a frustration he didn't understand, carrying a fear he didn't know how to name. And I could hear her in every cadence, every accusation, every tremor. And I asked him to slow down, to breathe, to talk to me directly, but he cut me off quickly, saying I didn't understand, saying I wasn't listening, saying she was hurting, and he needed to fix it. And that last sentence told me everything she had. Convinced him that her emotional stability depended entirely on him, that he was responsible for her happiness, that he was failing her if he didn't sacrifice pieces of himself for her comfort. And that kind of thinking destroys a person from the inside. And I told him carefully that relationships built on guilt never last. But the words didn't reach him. He was too deep in her narrative, too tangled in the fear she had woven around him, and before I could say anything else, he said she wanted to come over, said she needed to clear the air, said she wanted us to finally see her side. And the tone in his voice told me he wasn't asking, he was warning me. And the moment the call ended, I felt something cold unfurl inside me, a quiet instinct telling me she wasn't coming to heal anything. She was coming to tighten her grip. And not long after, the knock hit the door, sharp, precise, confident. And when I opened it, she stood there with a sweetness that didn't touch her eyes, the same too smooth smile she used whenever she was preparing to twist the narrative in her favor. and she stepped inside without waiting for permission, scanning the house like she was searching for proof of whatever story she had built around us. And my son followed behind her shoulders, tense eyes already darting between us like he was bracing for an explosion, and she began talking before any of us sat down. Her tone, soft, her phrasing, delicate, but every sentence dripping with accusation, disguised as vulnerability, saying she felt invisible, saying she felt disrespected, saying she felt unwelcome, saying she couldn't understand why we couldn't accept her, and she spoke in circles, never naming an actual moment, never pointing to a single thing, just feelings, 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 each one sharpened to cut deeper than the last. And my son kept watching her face, waiting for cues, waiting for direction, waiting for permission to speak, and every time he opened his mouth, she squeezed his arm lightly, guiding him back into silence, guiding him back into the version of himself she needed him to be: quiet, obedient, loyal, fearful. And at one point, she turned to him directly, saying softly, loud enough for us to hear, that she didn't feel safe, she didn't feel seen, she didn't feel valued. And he reacted instantly, promising her he would fix it, promising her he would stand up for her, promising her he wouldn't let anyone hurt her. And she looked at him with a softness that felt calculated, like she was rewarding a dog for performing on command. And then she turned that sweetness toward me, telling me she wished we could all get along, telling me she didn't want conflict, telling me she just wanted harmony. But her eyes never matched her voice. Her eyes stayed cold, assessing, measuring how much control she had gained since the last time she stepped into this house. And my son finally spoke, saying he needed us to try harder, needed us to support her, needed us to make her feel like part of the family. And his voice cracked on that last part, not because he believed we hadn't been kind to her, but because he had begun to believe her emotional reactions were truth, even when they came from insecurities she refused to face. And I felt something break quietly inside me, because I could see how deep her influence had sunk into him, how expertly she had tied her happiness to his shoulders, how she had made him believe love meant constant sacrifice and constant defense and constant effort, with no room left for him to breathe. And I realized he wasn't pushing our family away out of anger. He was pulling away because she taught him that closeness was a threat to her stability. And when she finally stood saying she hoped, this talk helped, saying she hoped things would change, saying she hoped we understood her, my son followed her instantly, as if pulled by a string tied around his spine. And as they walked out the door, I saw the way he looked back at me, eyes full of something raw, confused, scared, hopeful, and lost. And the door closed with a softness that felt heavier than any slam, because the real blow wasn't the sound, it was the truth, settling in like a bruise, forming slowly underneath the skin. He was slipping further than I realized, and she was pulling faster than I feared. The hours after they left slipped by in that strange, slow way. Time moves when something heavy is settling into place, something you don't have language for yet, something you can feel tightening around the edges of your life. And I moved through the rooms, trying to find steady ground, but everything reminded me of the moment she stood in my living room, shaping reality, as if truth bent itself around her emotions, and my son stood beside her, like a man trapped behind glass, and the weight of that image kept my chest tight long into night. And by the time morning light crept across the floor, house felt hollow, like it was missing a heartbeat, and I knew before the phone even rang that today would be worse, because that is how these things escalate, not in explosions, but in slow, relentless pressure. And when the call finally came, his voice hit me instantly, strained, frantic, already carrying her fingerprints, and he started talking, fast again, about how she spent the night crying, how she said she felt rejected, how she said she didn't think she could survive another interaction with us, how she said she felt like we hated her, how she said she might need space from him because his family made her feel unsafe. And each word sounded like a hook sinking deeper into him, and he didn't even realize he was bleeding for someone who saw vulnerability as leverage. And I asked him gently if he was okay, but he brushed past it as if the question didn't apply to him, and kept repeating that she was in pain, she was hurting, she was shaken, and he needed to fix it. He needed to show her she came first. He needed to prove loyalty. And my stomach tightened, because every sentence was spiraling into obligation, not love, and he didn't hear the difference anymore. And when I reminded him, families need boundaries, he snapped back, not out of anger but out of fear, saying she believed we were against her, saying she believed we wanted them to fail, saying she believed I didn't respect their relationship. And hearing that word believed over and over made the air around me feel heavier, because belief is easy to twist. Belief is easy to manipulate. Belief in the wrong hands becomes a weapon, and she wielded it with precision. And before I could calm him, he said she was coming over again, and he wanted us to talk to her differently this time, wanted us to be gentle, wanted us to validate her, wanted us to avoid triggering her, and the sudden shift in tone told me this wasn't a conversation he was leading. This was a script he had been given. And right then the doorbell rang, sharper than usual, and when I opened it, she stepped inside with that same fragile, wounded expression, a mask crafted so perfectly it could almost fool someone who didn't see the shadow beneath it, and she sat down without waiting for an invitation, folding her hands in her lap, eyes glistening with the exact number of tears needed to look believable, and she began speaking softly, trembling voice barely above a whisper, saying she didn't know what she had done wrong, saying she didn't know why our family hated her, saying she was trying so hard to connect, saying she wanted to belong, saying she felt invisible, saying she felt judged, and she kept shaking her head gently, as if holding back a collapse. And my son sat beside her, leaning forward, ready to catch every word as if they were fragile glass, and I studied him the way his hands. They were clasped together tightly, the way he kept glancing at her, as if waiting for direction, the way he leaned too far forward like he was trying to physically shield her from words that hadn't even been spoken. And when I asked calmly what exactly had made her feel unwelcome, she paused, just long enough for the lie to settle before saying it. There wasn't anything specific, it was just the energy, the tone, the atmosphere. And that word atmosphere echoed through me like a warning, because it meant nothing and everything at the same time. It meant she could reshape any moment, any silence, any facial expression into an attack, and he would accept it as fact. And she kept going, layering vague hurt over vague hurt, saying she needed emotional safety, saying she needed reassurance, saying she needed loyalty, saying she needed him to stand beside her no matter what, saying she needed our family to understand her trauma, and it took all my strength to stay still, because I could see exactly what she was doing. She wasn't expressing pain, she was constructing a prison, a psychological cage built out of guilt, expectation, and emotional dependency. And he was walking willingly into it, thinking he was protecting her, when really he was surrendering pieces of himself. And when I spoke gently, saying no one had hurt her, saying no one had excluded her, saying no one had spoken against her, she tightened her jaw, eyes flickering for a moment with something sharp, something cold, something she tried to hide, and then she leaned into him, placing her hand on his knee, head down, shoulders trembling, saying, "See, they don't believe me. See, they think I'm lying. See, this is what I've been trying to tell you." And his face crumpled instantly, flooded with panic. And he put the arm around her, pulling her close, whispering, "It's okay. It's okay. I believe you. I'm here. I'm here." And watching that scene unfold felt like watching someone drown, while the person holding their head underwater pretended they were saving them, and she lifted her head slowly, making sure he saw the tears, making sure he felt responsible for them, and whispered, "Maybe we should leave. Maybe your family doesn't want me here. Maybe I'm a burden." And he jolted like the word burden had cut him, and immediately shook his head, saying she wasn't a burden, saying he would never let her leave, saying he would choose her, saying he would protect her, saying he would prove to everyone that she mattered. And she leaned into him, eyes softening, not out of love but victory, because she had gotten exactly what she came for, his promise, his loyalty, his emotional compliance. And she stood slowly, wiping her eyes, looking at me with a trembling voice, thanking me for hearing her, thanking me for trying, thanking me for giving her space, and every word tasted rehearsed. And when they left, he looked back again, eyes full of something that struck me deeper than anger, deeper than fear, deeper than regret. It was loss, the loss of someone slipping away from himself, someone who didn't know how to get back. And the moment the door closed, the house felt colder than it ever had, and I stood there, breath held tight in my throat, because I knew, with terrifying clarity, that she wasn't just pulling him, A way she was preparing him for something bigger, something that would cost more than closeness, something that would break more than trust, something she believed she could gain through him if she controlled him completely, and I could feel the storm forming around us, tightening, ready to strike harder than anything we had seen yet. The next day began with the kind of silence that hums under the skin, a silence that feels like the moment right before a storm breaks, and I knew before anything even happened that something had shifted, something she had twisted during this night, something she had whispered in the dark to turn my son further from us and deeper into the world she was constructing around him, and I tried to move through my morning as if everything was still normal, but the air felt tight, the light felt dimmer, and I couldn't shake the sense that the situation was slipping in a direction none of us were prepared for. And by noon I heard the car pull up fast, gravel crunching under tires, and before I could reach the day door, it swung open and he walked in with that same frantic tension etched into every line of his body. And the second I saw his face, I knew she had fed him something heavy, something designed to sharpen his fear and blur his judgment. And he said her name, like a plea, already out of breath, already overwhelmed. And he started talking before I could even sit down, saying she didn't sleep again, saying she had been crying for hours, saying she questioned everything, saying she felt like she couldn't take another day of feeling unwanted, saying she didn't think our family accepted her, saying maybe she was the problem, saying maybe she should step away from him so he wasn't forced to choose. And the panic in his voice wasn't anger, it was desperation. The desperation of someone who had been told that the person they love is hurting because of them, and that guilt had sunk claws deep into him. And I listened as he paced back and forth, hands shaking, breath uneven, eyes unfocused. And every sentence he said replayed the same theme. She is hurting, she is hurting, she is hurting, as if repeating it made him responsible for fixing it. And when he finally stopped moving, he looked at me like he was begging for help, begging for clarity, begging for someone to pull him out of the fog she kept him in. And I wanted to reach him, wanted to shake him awake, wanted to tell him that the weight he was carrying didn't belong to him, but I knew he wouldn't hear me. Not yet, because she had tied guilt and love together in his mind, and it was strangling him slowly. And then the door opened again, and she stepped inside without hesitation, without invitation, same way she always entered spaces, as if they already belonged to her. And I watched the way his entire body tensed the moment she appeared, the way he straightened like he had been caught doing something wrong, the way his eyes flicked toward her for approval before he breathed again, and she walked toward us with that perfected, wounded expression, voice soft enough to sound fragile but sharp underneath the surface. And she said she didn't want conflict. She didn't want division. She didn't want to create tension. But everything about her tone said she believed she was the injured party, and we were the threat. And she sat down, folding her hands like someone preparing to give testimony, and began reciting every insecurity she had ever imagined, slight, every subtle twist of reality, saying she felt judged, saying she felt excluded, saying she felt misunderstood, saying she felt like she didn't belong. And she looked at my son after every phrase, watching his face carefully, making sure each word carved deeper into him, and he reacted immediately each time, reaching for her hand, pulling her close, whispering reassurance, whispering loyalty, whispering anything she needed to hear, and every whisper chipped another piece off him, and she saw it, saw the effect, saw the way he bent toward her need, and she kept going, layering emotion over emotion, shaping the narrative, until she was the victim he had to rescue at any cost. And I asked her calmly to explain one thing, one moment, one action that made her feel the way she described, but she avoided specifics, again circling back to vague feelings, vague impressions, vague energy, and I could see her calculating how to spin these vagaries into guilt. She looked at me with tears forming at the exact, precise, the moment she wanted them, and whispered, "Maybe I don't fit your standards. Maybe I'm not the kind of woman he wanted for him. Maybe you think he deserves better." And my son jerked as if someone had struck him, putting his arm around her, pulling her close, repeating, "No, no, no, don't say that. Don't think that they love you. They want you here. Please don't cry." And I watched the look in her eyes as she lowered her head and let a tear fall. And it wasn't grief, it was triumph. She had learned exactly how to make him responsible for her emotions, how to tie his worth to her pain, how to use sadness as a leash around his throat. And when she finally looked at me again, her voice trembled with practiced fragility as she said, "Maybe we should step away. Maybe the family bond is too strained. Maybe we're causing more harm than good." And he reacted instantly, panicking, visibly rushing to reassure her, promising he would never let that happen, promising she meant everything, promising he would choose her if he had to. And she leaned into him again, letting him speak, letting him sink deeper into the guilt. She crafted letting him believe he was the one holding the relationship together when she was the one pulling every string, and she stood slowly, saying she needed space, saying she felt shaken, saying she hoped we understood, saying she hoped the tension would ease, and he followed her to the door immediately, as if pulled by an invisible rope, and I saw it in every line of his body. He wasn't choosing her, he was terrified of losing her, terrified of the collapse she threatened him with, terrified of the emotional consequences she hinted at whenever he tried to think for himself. And she looked back at me one last time, her expression soft but victorious, whispered, "I hope someday you understand," and then they left, leaving the house full of a silence that pressed into my chest until it hurt, and I stood alone in that quiet air, realizing that this wasn't just emotional manipulation anymore. This was isolation, this was dependency, this was someone building a cage inside my son's mind and convincing him it was his home. And I felt the fear settle deeper, sharper, because if this was how easily she controlled his heart, what would she do when she wanted to control more? What would she do when she wanted to pull him even further? What would she do when she decided the family itself was the obstacle, standing between her and whatever future she had imagined? And as the hours passed and the light faded, I understood for the first time fully, painfully, that this wasn't a conflict, this wasn't a misunderstanding, this was war won. My son didn't realize he was already losing. The day after she walked out with that soft, victorious smile, the house felt colder than it had in years, a kind of cold that didn't come from weather, but from knowing something. Inside the family had cracked so sharply the fracture echoed through every room, and I spent the morning trying to find something steady to hold on to. But every quiet second felt like it belonged to the aftermath of a storm that hadn't finished destroying everything yet. And by afternoon, I found myself sitting at the edge of the dining table with my hands pressed together, breathing slowly, because a part of me already sensed the next blow was coming. And when the phone finally rang, the sound sliced through the stillness like a blade, and the second I saw his name, I knew this call would not be a conversation, it would be fallout. And when I answered, nothing but panicked breathing came through the line, his breath fast, shallow, uneven, like someone trying to outrun their own thoughts. And when he finally spoke, his voice cracked under the weight of something he didn't know how to carry. And he said she was gone, said she left without warning, said she packed everything, said she didn't look at him, said she didn't say goodbye, said she told him she couldn't stay with someone whose family hated her, said she told him he didn't fight hard enough, said she told him he wasn't choosing her fully, and he kept repeating her words like they were echoing inside his skull, stabbing through every part of him, and he sounded broken, not angry, not defensive, just broken, a man who handed his entire sense of self to someone who walked away the moment she didn't get exactly what she could have wanted. And I closed my eyes, breathing slowly, as he fell apart on the other end of the line, whispering that he didn't understand, whispering that he tried so hard, whispering that he gave her everything, whispering that she told him he wasn't enough, whispering that she didn't know if she ever loved him at all. And each whisper was a slice through my chest, because this wasn't the son who used to stand tall. This was someone she had hollowed out piece by piece until he became a vessel for her insecurities, and now that she was gone, the vessel collapsed, and all that remained was grief, confusion, and the echo of her manipulations. And he begged me to tell him what he did wrong, begged me to tell him how to fix it, begged me to tell him how to make her come back, begged me to tell him if he pushed too hard or not enough. And hearing him beg like that opened something inside me so painfully deep, I had to grip the back of the chair to stay upright, and I told him slowly, carefully, that what he had lost wasn't love. It was the illusion she constructed around him, the illusion she used to keep him loyal, the illusion she used to isolate him, the illusion she used to make him believe his worth depended on her approval. And he didn't believe me. Not immediately, not fully, because grief doesn't let truth in easily, and he kept whispering that she meant everything, whispering that he had no one left, whispering that he ruined everything, whispering that maybe she was right, whispering that maybe he wasn't enough for anyone. And that was the moment I felt something inside me turn from sorrow into something sharper, because those weren't his thoughts, they were hers, planted deep enough that, even in her absence, they bloomed inside him like poison. And I told him gently but firmly that she didn't leave because he wasn't enough. She left because he stopped giving her complete control. She left because he hesitated. She left because manipulation only works when the target obeys. And the moment he faltered, she cut him loose, and his breath hitched loudly through the phone, the kind of sound someone makes when truth and pain collide at the same time. And I told him I knew this hurt worse than anything he'd ever felt. I told him I knew it felt like his world was ending. I told him I knew it felt like losing her meant losing the future he imagined. But I also told him he wasn't alone, and he choked out something between a sob and a laugh, saying he didn't know how to come home, didn't know if he had the right, didn't know if I still wanted him around, after everything he had said, after everything he had done, after all the ways he had pushed us away. And I felt my throat tighten because he truly believed that choosing her meant losing us forever. And I told him quietly that he had never stopped being family, never stopped being my son, never stopped being someone I would fight for even when he thought he was fighting against me. And he cried harder. Then the kind of crying that doesn't come from heartbreak, but from the slow realization that he wasn't abandoned, even when he abandoned himself. And after a long, quiet stretch, he whispered that he was scared, scared of being alone, scared of facing what she left behind, scared of seeing himself clearly without her words shaping his identity, scared of rebuilding from nothing. And I told him, fear after manipulation is normal, fear after losing someone who controlled you is expected, and healing doesn't start with pretending everything is fine. Healing starts with collapse and silence and space. And I told him he could come here, come home, sit in the quiet, breathe, remember who he was before. She rewrote his mind, and after a moment he whispered, "Can I really?" And that question alone nearly broke me, because it told me exactly how deep her influence had sunk. She made him believe love was conditional, belonging was conditional, family was conditional. And I told him, yes, yes, come home. Yes, let the dust fall. Yes, let yourself feel everything. Yes, you can start again. And when he arrived later that evening, he looked empty, shoulders slumped, eyes, swollen face pale as if he had aged years in a single day, and he walked inside slowly like someone who wasn't sure if the ground would hold him. And I didn't rush him, didn't touch him, didn't speak. I just let him stand there, breathing, shaking, unraveling. And when he finally stepped toward me, he whispered, "I'm sorry for everything." And I felt my chest ache in that, a familiar deep way. But I didn't let him apologize further. I just told him, "You're here, and that's enough." And it felt like something small but important shifted inside him, a tiny crack of light in a place that had been dark for too long. And as the night settled around us, he sat quietly, hands shaking, a little eyes distant but softer than before. And I knew the road ahead would be long, messy, painful. But this was the moment he returned, not fully, not healed, not whole but present. And for the first time since she wrapped him in her lies, I felt a flicker of hope somewhere deep inside the grief, the hope that he could rebuild himself. Not the version she demanded, but the version he lost and the version he deserved to become. The days after he came home were strange in a way that made the house feel both heavier and quieter, like the air itself was trying to relearn how to move around him. And I watched him drift from room to room with that hollow look in his two eyes, the kind of emptiness that doesn't come from losing love, but from realizing the love you thought you had was never real. And he spent hours sitting at the edge of the couch staring at nothing, hands clasped tightly together, as if he was terrified that letting them go would make everything crumble again. And I tried not to hover, not to push, not to fill the silence, because I knew he wasn't ready for answers, he wasn't ready for explanations, he wasn't ready for anything, except the simple fact that someone was there and wouldn't leave when the emotions came in waves. And on the third morning he finally spoke, voice quiet, rough, like it hadn't been used in years, and he said he didn't recognize himself anymore, didn't recognize the sides Choices he made, didn't understand how he let things go so far, didn't understand how he confused control with love, didn't understand why her voice still echoed in his mind telling him he wasn't enough, and hearing him speak those words made something inside me twist painfully because I remembered the boy he had been, the way he used to run barefoot across the yard, the way he used to talk with too much excitement, the way he used to have opinions that were sharp and loud and entirely his. And now he sat here, looking like a man who had been sanded down until nothing remained but fear, guilt, and confusion. And I told him gently that losing yourself is not something you notice. As it happens, you don't wake up one day and decide to give parts of yourself away. It happens through small compromises, small lies, small moments of silence where you should have spoken, until suddenly you look in the mirror and see someone who doesn't remember where the real version of you ended and the one shaped by someone else began. And he nodded slowly as if the words landed somewhere deep and raw inside him, and he whispered that he kept replaying every fight. Every moment he sighed, chose her over us. Every time he defended her, every time he believed her, every time he told himself we were the problem. And each memory felt like a weight he didn't know how to put down. And I told him quietly that shame only traps you deeper. And he didn't need shame. He needed clarity. He needed stillness. He needed to forgive the version of himself who didn't know better because he had been manipulated, not loved, controlled, not supported, used, not valued. And he looked at me with eyes full of tears. He didn't quite let fall and whispered that he hated himself for hurting us, for pushing us away, for believing lies that painted his family as villains. And I shook my head because none of this came from hatred. It came from vulnerability, and the wrong person finding it and sinking their claws into it. And we sat there in silence for a long time, until he finally said the thing I knew had been circling in his mind for days. He asked if she ever cared at all, and I breathed slowly before answering, because he deserved the truth, but he also deserved compassion, and I told him she cared only in the ways that benefited her, only in the moments where his devotion made her feel powerful, only in the ways that made him easier to control. And he closed his eyes in pain, but he didn't argue, because deep down he already knew. And the next day he tried to go back to work but came home early, saying he couldn't focus, couldn't think, couldn't escape the feeling that everything reminded him of her. Every street corner, every commercial, every ringtone, every place they had gone, every dream they built, together in conversations she guided, and he sat again in the living room, breathing shallow, like something inside him was unraveling. And I reminded him gently that healing after manipulation isn't like healing from heartbreak. It's like detox, shaking the lies out of your bloodstream, shaking the fear out of your bones, shaking the guilt out of your mind. And he said he didn't know how to move forward, didn't know how to rebuild, didn't know if he was even worth rebuilding. And that last part cracked through me, because it showed how deeply she had carved into his sense of self. And I placed a hand on the back of his shoulder, not pulling, not pushing, just steadying, and told him he didn't need to rebuild everything, he just needed to begin with one thing. The truth that he wasn't unlovable, he wasn't broken, he wasn't beyond repair. He was simply someone who trusted the wrong person too deeply, and that happens in this world more than anyone admits. And as the days passed, he began speaking more, not confidently, not steadily, but honestly. And he admitted the things he had been afraid to say before, like how she isolated him from friends, how she questioned every message on his phone, how she reacted when he didn't text fast enough, how she made him feel guilty for spending time with family, how she made him believe independence was betrayal, and saying it out loud looked like it hurt him, but it also freed him piece by piece. And one evening, as the sun dimmed, he sat across from me and whispered that he finally understood. She didn't love him, she needed him. And those were two very different things, and saying it aloud broke something open, because he finally saw the difference between love and possession. And he cried again quietly, but not like before, not like someone drowning, but like someone releasing the last poison from their lungs. And after the tears slowed, he whispered the question that had been haunting him. Why didn't I see it? And I told him the truth, because you wanted to believe in her, because you loved her, because she made you feel chosen, because she fed the part of you that doubted itself, because nothing blinds a person faster than the desire to matter. and he nodded slowly, letting that truth settle, and the next morning he asked if he could stay a while longer, if he could find himself here, if he could rebuild slowly, and all I said was, yes, because home is not a place, it's a return. And he was finally returning, not the same, not healed, not whole, but honest enough to start walking forward, and in the quiet followed I felt something lift inside me, not the pain that would take time, not the fear that would take longer, but the smallest flicker of relief, because he wasn't drifting anymore, he wasn't sinking, he wasn't disappearing into someone else's shadow. He was here breathing, choosing, thinking, and for the first time since she entered his life, that was enough for me. The beginning of something fragile but real, the beginning of him finding himself again.